Another interesting chapter, and this is going to be where sociology and criminology, those two social science disciplines, kind of merge with each other. Um, so today we will talk a little bit about, we're going to go ahead and define what deviance is, because deviance is going to be connected to criminal activity. We'll take a look at different types of perceptions of deviance, how we look at it from maybe a moral perspective, a medical perspective, a cultural relative type of perspective. We'll discuss how deviance can be both dysfunctional and functional. I know it may sound a little bit unusual that deviant behavior can be healthy and functional. Sometimes it can. We'll talk about how that happens. We will discuss sanctions and social controls. These are things that are put in place by society to kind of monitor and control behavior. So we'll talk about the different types. We'll break down and discuss different types of crime categories, how crimes are tracked, and then some sociological / criminology theories to kind of have a deeper understanding of crime and deviance. All right. So what is deviance? It is simply a violation of a norm. If you remember, we talked about what a norm is. It's an expectation of behavior in social situations, how you're expected to act from your family and social situations, from society. And once you deviate away from that and move outside what is considered the norm or normal, then that is going to be a term called deviance. Sociology does not look at the word deviance as being bad. It's not bad behavior at all. It's not how it's perceived. It's perceived as going outside the norm or the status quo. Deviance is universal, which means in all cultures, all societies around the world, we're going to see crime, we're going to see deviance, we're going to see people pushing against the status quo, to push against society. So it's universal, it's cross-cultural, and cross-cultural means it's going to run across all cultures around the world. And there's going to be a large spectrum of what deviance is. So there's going to be a lot of variance between doing something that's just considered socially inappropriate within a social setting, all the way up to horrible, violent crimes. Deviance is also a relative term. It's based on perception. What you may consider deviant, I may not consider deviant. What the United States considers deviant and criminal behavior, other countries may not view that at all. It means different things to different people. So our perception of what is a crime and what is deviance is taught. We learn that from society. Let's take a look at some different perceptions of deviance. Since I just mentioned that a lot of times deviance is based on perception, the moral view of deviance, this is a very black and white perspective. So this is the idea that certain behaviors, certain types of acts in society are morally wrong. It could be on a humanistic level that it's morally wrong. It may be on a religious type of level that it's either sinful or holy. And this is also going to be relative to each person as well, because we all have different ideas of morality. What is moral and immoral type of behavior? What is good versus bad behavior? But a lot of people would probably agree that the abuse of children, the abuse of the elderly, murder, rape, assault, violence against people are things that we should not do, that they are considered morally wrong. But there's going to be a lot of variance between us, even in this classroom. Some people view certain types of behavior from a moral perspective. Some people view certain types of behavior more from a medical perspective, that there's an issue of sickness. It's not so much a sin problem. It's not so much a religious problem, but it's more of a medical type of issue. And that's where the medical view steps in. So from the medical view, they would be looking at certain types of behavior, not based on does this person have a religious issue, a morality issue, a sin issue, but is this person sick? Are they having issues that need to be addressed with medicine or therapy or possibly even surgeries? Are they traumatized as a child because of their environment? Do they have anxiety, PTSD, depression? It's not because they're a bad kid, it's because of their particular type of environment. I would often see this whenever I worked with senior citizens in assisted living facilities, whenever they had Alzheimer's or dementia, whenever their brain was deteriorating and they started to act out in inappropriate ways, violent ways, sexually inappropriate ways, things that they never would have done before prior to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And we don't look at those people as being morally corrupt individuals. We see them as being sick. There's something wrong. They need some help. Sometimes even brain tumors. Depending upon where brain tumors are in the brain, it can have a massive effect on personalities, completely change people's personality to drive them into suicidal ideologies, homicidal ideologies, harming others, self-harm, a lot of violence. And so it's not necessarily that this person is necessarily a bad person, is that they have some sort of biological, physiological condition that is manipulating their perception and kind of creating violence. And sometimes in this situation here, it's as simple as going in there and having surgery and actually removing that brain tumor, and hopefully everything would be fine. So this is going to be more of the medical view. How do we help these people that are struggling with illness or sickness?
Could that go the opposite way, a brain tumor? As far as,
Oh,
I mean, is that
interesting.
possible?
I think anything's possible, where you have somebody who's a violent jerk and all of a sudden they get a brain tumor and they're just the sweetest guy.
Yes.
Maybe.
No,
Maybe. I don't. That's a good question. That's a good question. I usually don't hear it go that direction, but yeah, I think anything's possible. I really do. I wouldn't shut the door on anything at all. And then we have the cultural relative view. And this is where sociology and anthropology is going to be more broad-minded. So it's not going to be black and white, like the moral view. It's right or wrong, it's simple, it's holy. That's black and white. When it comes to the medical view, it's also black and white. You're sick or you're healthy, very black and white. When it comes to the cultural relative view, this is on that spectrum here, and it's based on perception, your belief system, how you were raised. So the perception of what is normal and deviant can change through time, and we've seen this. When I was growing up, it was very socially appropriate to smoke in public areas, restaurants, the mall. Whenever I was actually in high school, if you were 18 years old, there was a smoking section for students. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? But I remember in the mid to early 90s, there would be 18-year-old students go into a smoking section, and they would actually be bumming cigarettes off the teachers. And they'd be, can you imagine seeing that today? Not a chance. We don't even allow smoking on this campus. We're pretty much everybody's adults.
You can smoke in courtrooms.
Courtroom.
In the hospital, the nursing station, they always talk about that. They used to have like where they could smoke it. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, smoking. I mean, there was a time period where doctors actually they believed that smoking had some health benefits, and they would actually encourage their patients to smoke. What about airplanes? Every time you go on an airplane, you see it goes. It also goes to show you how old that plane is, because it has that no smoking sign on that. But yeah, people used to smoke on planes. I'm glad this has actually changed. I was a kid who grew up with asthma, and so it was nice to see smoking kind of slowly eradicated out of that. But yeah, it's considered pretty taboo and inappropriate today. Deviance can be very much situational. Assault is the main type of violent crime where people get into a lot of trouble for getting into fights and domestic violence and getting drunk and getting into fights. But at the same time, there's people who get into the ring and they get paid millions of dollars to beat up on each other. So in one situation, it's inappropriate, it's a crime, you go to prison. Another one, you are highly rewarded. So it's very much situational. Same thing goes for drinking. I mean, if you're at a bar and you're drinking, well, that kind of makes sense. If you're going to church and you stumble in hammered, that's a problem, right? That is a problem. So in one situation, it's okay. The other one, not so much. It can also change based on social status, and there's a lot of examples that we could give to this. Prior to 2015, same-sex marriage was not legal nationwide, so there were a lot of states, even the state of Arkansas, that did not allow same-sex marriage prior to 2015. So a lot of southern states considered it to be deviant behavior. A lot of northern states, they legalized it and they found that it was fine. Another example of this would be women's right to vote. Prior to 1920, women were not allowed to vote on a national scale. It was perceived that that is not their place, it is not their responsibility, they should not be doing that. And today, more women vote than men. So it can change based on social status. If you would have asked people in the 1950s in Arkansas if we ever would have had a black president in 2008, they would have said, you're crazy. Because at that time, we were a segregated state during that time. But as time goes by, things change. Location, things can change as well. I've given this example before. Here in the US, polygamy is not allowed in any of the 50 states that we've got, but 80% of the rest of the world, it is completely fine to get married to more than one person. And it is often culturally and religiously encouraged in a lot of places around the world. From an American perspective, I ask students that sometimes. I ask my students, I say, how would you feel about having more than one husband and more than one wife? The vast majority are like, no. They feel like they've got their hands full with one. But it also shows an American perspective of individuality because we're not raised thinking that that's normal behavior. So yeah, the only people who ever raised their hand in my class when I asked, would you like to have more than one wife, is usually young guys, 18 years old. And they're obviously thinking about multiple sexual partners, but they're really not thinking about the holistic aspect of being married. That's what they're thinking of.
They don't understand that at that point.
No, they don't. They don't understand. There's a lot more that comes with marriage and a healthy marriage and raising a family. It's a lot of work. Yeah. But yeah, most Americans would say no. It's absolutely not. But most places around the world, it's fine. So let's take a look at how deviance can be both functional and dysfunctional. And this really kind of ties into symbolic interactionism. So if you remember in chapter 2, we talked about symbolic interactions and how it looks at different things in society and tries to view if it's functional or dysfunctional, healthy or unhealthy. So even when it comes to deviant behavior, it can be perceived that way. So deviance, a lot of times when we think about deviant behavior, we do look at it from a dysfunctional perspective and the unhealthy things it does. So deviance can disrupt social order in society. By people committing crimes or acting out, it does kind of disrupt the balance of a social situation. It disrupts people's lives. If anybody's ever been a victim of a crime or crime has touched their family in some sort of way, it can be absolutely devastating to that family. It can cause a lot of problems. Riots, violence, assassinations, burning buildings down, cause a lot of issues. Deviance also can destroy trust. A lot of times this happens in relationships. So lying, manipulation, cheating, deception, gaslighting. And a lot of times it can be very difficult to get that trust back. There's some relationships, whether it's between partners or between a parent and a child, that whenever trust is broken, sometimes they can mend that, but sometimes it takes a lot of work to try to mend that relationship. Lastly, deviance can divert tax revenue. So if a particular city is really struggling with crime, whether we're talking about Detroit or Los Angeles, Chicago, Little Rock, whatever it may be, then they may have to kind of pull the tax resources within that area that everybody pays into to hire more police officers to 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 enhance or increase the the prison system. And so if that money is kind of being used to deal with crime and deviance within that area, then that money is not being used to clean up the city parks that everybody uses. The money's not being used to deal with the potholes and the issues on the roads and the interstate system. That money is not being used to enhance the public school system where they need to enhance the technology and get rid of the asbestos and bring in better teachers. So this is also a way that deviant behavior can also be dysfunctional as well. It moves those needed resources to kind of deal with crime and deviance. But by people pushing against the status quo, bucking the system, that's where a lot of change occurs. And it's not necessarily an easy process. So if you remember in chapter 2, we talked about Karl Marx and conflict theory and having this kind of collective conscience where people kind of, they feel marginalized and they kind of push back for equality. That's kind of one example there. So how can deviance be functional or healthy? Well, one thing it does, it kind of sets parameters. It sets societal limits. By people pushing boundaries, policies are put in place. Places like UACCM or wherever, policies and laws are put in place. You know, there was a time period whenever texting and driving was not illegal in the state of Arkansas. But by people kind of pushing those boundaries, it caused some issues. People running off the road, accidents, unfortunately some deaths. And so now there's a lot of laws in place to kind of deal with some of those issues. Another thing deviance does, it can expose that there's underlying issues that need to be addressed. A lot of times whenever we're thinking about people acting out, we're looking specifically just at their behavior and how that needs to change. But sometimes there's an underlying issue why this person is acting inappropriate or really kind of acting out. So if we have a young child that's at school and all of a sudden their grades start to drop, they're starting to act out in class, the behavior may seem a little bit unusual, kind of out of character. Well, there may be a tendency to reprimand that child and to possibly punish that child because the child is acting out, when there really may be some underlying issues that this kid is dealing with that needs to be addressed below the surface. What could be an example of what that kid might be dealing with while they're acting out at school?
Abuse at home
Yeah, there could be some abuse
or neglect.
at home. Could
Child
be
being bullied, like there could be so many things.
abuse, neglect. They may be bullied, and so they're kind of acting out. hmm The parents may be going through a divorce. They're sad. They're broken about it. They don't really have the vocabulary on how to articulate their feelings about this. And so they're in so much pain because their safe little world has kind of been disheveled and rocked. And all of a sudden they're kind of acting out. Sometimes we see this in the prison system, in certain prison systems, whenever certain prisons or inmates are experience certain forms of abuse. Um, they may be acting out because of that. Not always. Sometimes prisoners, they just act out because that's what they do. But I guess my point is that whenever we're looking at people's behavior, especially if it's out of character, sometimes we have to look at what's going on. Do you need some help? You're acting out of character. And sometimes, and a lot of parents, they need to do this with their kids. If their kids are struggling with something, just having a simple conversation. You know, what's going on? Do you need some help? And a lot of times you'll kind of figure out there's something going on that needs to be looked at. A lot of times we see this whenever children are being molested. They start acting out, they start acting sexually inappropriate, they start having issues of wetting the bed. All of a sudden, they're scared of people, and so it's not the child needs to be punished in any way, but you got to dig a little bit deeper sometimes. And lastly, deviants can set in motion positive social change. And this kind of goes back again to the creation of different movements by kind of bucking the system and kind of pushing against the status quo to end slavery, to end segregation, to give women the right to vote, to give citizenship to African Americans. A lot of different examples there.
Where's the fine line between functional deviance and dysfunctional?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like, you think of Martin Luther King and the protests, and you look at some of the ones in recent years. I guess that fine line is where it goes from protesting to destroy.
To riots and destroy.
Rioting.
There is. And I would probably say that most sociologists, that if they're looking at kind of bucking the system to create positive change, the majority of them, if not probably all of them, would say do it peacefully. Do it peacefully. So if you want to protest, that's fine. If you want to get on social media, that's fine. But yeah, there is a fine line where you take it to a point where there is violence and assassinations. And there are some groups that will actually try to capitalize on the movement for their own financial benefit. So if they are destroying businesses or stealing things, there's almost a level of a justification that those people really aren't there for the movement. Those people are there to create havoc. And whenever there's so much disarray within the city, it's a lot easier to steal and pillage and destroy because there's just chaos everywhere. So yeah, that's not, in my opinion, that wouldn't be a functional aspect of trying to create positive social change at all.
Works against your cause.
It does work against your cause.
Counterproductive to what they're.
Absolutely. And we've seen that before in the last couple of months. Whenever there were certain riots going on, there were people that were there coming forward saying, stop it, that were actually part of the cause. They said, stop, we are not about this. They are not with us. And so it really did start to damage their cause. Absolutely. So yeah, there is that fine line. So let's take a look at sanctions and social controls. So sanctions are put in place to try to modify behavior, to either reinforce positive behavior or to punish or extinguish negative behavior. Society does this on a community scale with police officers. This also happens on a micro level whenever parents are correcting their children or positively reinforcing their children. So this both works on macro and micro levels. Positive sanction is going to be a reward for a behavior. There's a certain reward that an employer appreciates, that a parent likes in their child, and so they positively reinforce that. It could be as simple as, attaboy, attagirl, I appreciate you. Hey, you did really great in school. Let's go out to eat. We'll take a vacation. And the perception is that this behavior is good. I want to acknowledge it and I want to reinforce it. And this is something that's really important with employers and supervisors. Supervisors really need to take the time to remember that their job is not to just punish behavior whenever their low-level employees mess up, come in late or whatever, but they also need to acknowledge the positive. And if they're acknowledging the positive, it's going to reinforce that within their employees to continue to do that. And this is just human nature. People want to be acknowledged for their hard work. And whenever we acknowledge that, it makes people feel good. It makes them want to do it again, especially children. So you have to address the good behavior, but you also have to make sure that you're addressing the negative behavior. And these are referred to as negative sanctions. So this could be some form of punishment for a certain type of behavior. So again, it could come to a supervisor, to their employee, a parent to a child, the teacher in a situation with a particular student to try to address certain types of behavior. What's really important with both positive and negative sanctions, if you want the strongest psychological effect, is that the sanction needs to be put in place immediately after the behavior occurs. Like I said, whether you're dealing with an employee or a spouse or a child, you want to acknowledge it, either reward it or punish it as quickly as possible. Also, what has a longer effect is that if it's done kind of consistently, if you're doing it consistently. That's the most effective way to really kind of shape the behavior, especially from a parent to a child. If there's a lot of inconsistency in parenting your child, if you're acknowledging some behavior sometimes, if you're ignoring it others, if you are putting boundaries in place and you hold the line with that boundary sometimes, but other times you kind of ignore it because you don't want to deal with it, well, that creates a lot of inconsistency, and there's going to be a good chance that the child or the teenager is going to recognize that, and there's just going to be a tendency for them to step over that boundary because mom or dad holds that line every now and then. So consistency is going to be really important when it comes to these types of sanctions. Next, we have what's called social controls. Three main categories of social controls, but the two big ones are either external or they are internal. So let's talk about the external social controls. External social controls is going to be the social pressure that we feel externally, and we typically feel this on a daily basis. The external pressure that we may feel from our parents, from society, from our teachers, from our bosses, we kind of feel this type of pressure. Sometimes even from our priests and our preachers and our congregation, we kind of feel this pressure to conform. So formal external social controls, these are the social controls that are put in place by our judicial system, the courts, the laws that we abide by, police officers on the streets. And these are really important because they kind of set up parameters in our society. It's important to have it, but it's also important to understand that these are the weakest types of social controls. Not that they're not important, but they are the weakest in shaping our behavior. The reason we typically have certain types of behavior is not so much because we're scared that a cop is going to see us do that, or that there's a law that's actually against it. It's important to have it, but it's not the strongest type of social control. Another type of external social control are called informal external social controls, and these are stronger than the formal ones because this has to do with the social pressure that you feel from people that you care about and that care about you to try to keep you on the straight and narrow. This may be the social pressure that you feel from your parents, from your priest or your preacher or your rabbi that you have a close connection with, the type of relationship you have with very close friends that are trying to make sure that you are doing what you need to do and that you're okay. So these are going to be those more intimate, personal types of relationships that are really just trying to navigate you in the right direction. So this is going to have a stronger psychological effect than, say, police officers and our court system. The third one are called internal social controls, and this is the strongest one. But it's really only strong if you have a conscience. So people who are psychopaths and sociopaths, they're probably really going to struggle with because they usually don't have this internal social control, this moral compass to keep them in check. They're usually just kind of looking at ways to angle and manipulate to get what they want. So the internal social control is the strongest. This is your conscience. This is your moral compass. This is that small little voice that says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And the reason why the internal social control or our conscience is so strong is because it's also tied into our central nervous system that affects the way we feel. So if you've ever caught yourself thinking or doing something that kind of goes against your moral compass or your beliefs, you probably started to notice that your body started to change. In what ways can your body change if you're thinking about violating your conscience? What can happen to the physical body?
Your blood pressure's gonna go up. Your heart rate's gonna go up.
So blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up. What else can happen to the body? Nervous?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anxiety,
Anxiety, stress, hands get sweaty, may affect your stomach a little bit. You know, you're kind of looking around, you're kind of getting nervous. So your body's really screaming at you at this point. It's pretty much saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And so if you listen to that little voice and you decide, you know what, I don't believe in this, I'm not going to do it. The moment you make that decision to not do it, what happens to all those feelings? They wash away. That's right. So it kind of keeps you in check. But sometimes we give in to temptation, right? Sometimes the voice is screaming in our head, no matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's drugs, alcohol, sex, stealing. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about doing. But sometimes the temptation is so strong that you decide, you know what? I know it's wrong, but dadgummit, I'm going to do it. And you do it, whatever it is. And there's also an after effect after you've done that that can also have a strong psychological effect. So, what are some things that you may experience after the deed is done?
Guilt, shame,
Guilt,
depression.
shame, remorse. That's right. So, and that may be enough, that experience of shame and remorse and guilt may be so uncomfortable after the fact that you may decide, you know what, I can't do that again. All right. So this kind of works on both ends. That's why it's so powerful. So let's kind of break it down. We'll talk about different types of crime category. And this is what sociologists and the criminal justice system they do. They break up various crimes into the various categories. The two main types of categories are going to be violent and property crimes. Those are the two big ones. Violent crimes make up about 20% of all crimes in the US, around 20%. So these are going to be crimes against people, sometimes referred to as street crimes. Murder, assault, rape, assault being the most common whenever somebody's being physically attacked. A lot of times they're also under the influence of some sort of drug, but typically alcohol whenever there's assaults. So these are violent crimes. Overall, violent crimes and property crimes have actually been going down for decades. It may not seem like it because we live in this 24-hour news cycle where everything we see is about somebody committing some sort of crime. But really, overall, it has actually been kind of going down, except for hate crimes, crimes against people based on their race or their ethnicity or their religion. That's the one type of violent crime we actually have seen an uptick in over the last few years, unfortunately. So you may be asking yourself, well, how has crime been going down over the last 30 or 40 years? Well, there's a few reasons why. Number one, there are more police on the streets than ever before. Number two, we live in a surveillance society where everybody has a video camera in their back pocket, and most people are kind of aware of that. There's webcams everywhere, so we kind of do live in this surveillance society. Another factor is there's a lot of states that have three strikes you're out crime laws, where if you commit three serious felonies, that you can spend the rest of your life in prison. So a lot of factors are playing kind of into this. 75 to 80% of the rest of the crimes are going to kind of fall into property crimes. And this is usually motivated by money. People who are stealing, shoplifting, it's usually about greed. It's not about hurting somebody. So the majority are going to be about around 75, 80%. But we are seeing these going down as well. Larceny theft is the most common type of property crime. Depending upon how much shoplifting this is, it's either shoplifting, pickpocket, purse snatching. Depending upon how much has been stolen, it could be either a misdemeanor or a felony. But larceny theft is the most common, and so an example of that is going to be shoplifting. Another category is called a victimless crime. And this is usually where there's not really a clear victim to go to the police station and report it. These are usually crimes that people are committing themselves, that for the most part, they're kind of hurting themselves. So if somebody's involved in illegal or illicit drug use, they're using personal drugs. They're not saying it doesn't have an effect on the family and hurting other people, but it's usually hurting themselves the most. Public intoxication, vagrancy, prostitution. A lot of these are going to be some other examples of victimless crimes. And this is also why a lot of times police officers sometimes have to go undercover, because there are crimes that are being committed out there that people are not reporting because they are committing it actually themselves. And so police officers may go undercover to deal with issues of drugs and also prostitution, even gambling. We can also break down crimes into a couple different categories based on socioeconomic status. So your socioeconomic status has to deal with how much money, power, status, and education that you have. And depending upon if you have a high socioeconomic status or a low one, sometimes it can have an effect on the type of crimes that people choose to commit. Blue collar crimes. These are going to be usually individuals with a lower socioeconomic status. They don't have a lot of money, not highly educated. They may struggle with drugs and alcohol addictions. So a lot of times the type of crimes that they're going to be committing are going to be, a lot of times it's going to be theft. It could be robbery, theft, burglary, breaking into somebody's home. A lot of these types of crimes, robbing a gas station. A lot of these crimes are about getting money really, really quick in order to survive or really kind of feed that addiction. They're more likely to get caught because, like I said, we do live in a surveillance society. So a lot of these crimes are kind of done out in the public, stealing somebody's car and driving off. We have Ring doorbells everywhere, so they're much more likely to get caught and to spend time in prison. White collar crimes are usually done by individuals or companies or corporations with a high socioeconomic status. They're not going to be robbing the Shell station. They're not going to be breaking into people's homes and doing those types of things. They're looking for the big scores. They're trying to not get caught. They're doing everything pretty much behind the scenes. That's why they are less likely to get caught. They have money, they have connections, they have status. So a lot of their crimes are going to be behind the scenes. Could be different forms of embezzling investors' money, insider trading, identity theft. If you've ever received an email that says that you won the lottery and that we need your personal information to release the funds to you, that's referred to as phishing. They're kind of throwing out their line and they're just hoping somebody bites in order to get your personal information. And so that's another example of identity theft. So a lot of this is done behind the scenes, behind closed doors, behind screens. So they're not only less likely to get caught, they're also less likely to go to prison. And this is for a few reasons. Well, one reason is they're less likely to get caught because they're not doing it out in the public. But a lot of times they also have a lot of influence, they have a lot of connections, and they have a lot of money to be able to afford high-level attorneys to kind of put a spin on things to prevent them from actually going to prison. Another advantage they have is money. Sometimes people are able to settle out of court, basically writing a check to kind of make things go away. Wealthy, rich, powerful people, they have the ability to make things go away with money. Where poor people who are struggling in addiction, people who are homeless, they're just not going to have the connections, the resources, or the money to be able to do those things. That's another reason why they're more likely to spend time in prison. And what's interesting is that sometimes the white collar crimes can be more devastating to society than, say, the blue collar crime. You have a young person who has a little bit too much weed on them, more than they're supposed to, They could spend several years in prison. And I'm not saying it's right that they have this weed or drugs on them. They can spend several years in prison, kind of become part of the system, have felony charges. But you have pharmaceutical companies out there that may absolutely know that a new drug that they're putting out on the market, they know that there are negative side effects, but they don't want to disclose it. They don't want to talk about it because it could affect their bottom line. And so they keep that quiet. They keep that hush hush. And that could have really devastating effects on people's lives that are actually taking those medications. So that's the difference between white collar and blue collar crimes. Next, we have organized crimes. So organized crimes are going to be groups of people that are organized and they are involved in illegal or illicit business practices. A lot of times when we think about organized crimes or syndicates, we think about drug cartels, the mob, the mafia, but also even street gangs are involved in organized crime. So if street gangs are organized and they're involved in prostitution, selling drugs, stealing vehicles, they're kind of organized and they've got a system in place. They would also fall into this category as well. The Hells Angels, a biker gang, is known for their manufacturing and distribution of methamphetamine. They would also fall under the category of an organized crime. So drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, counterfeiting, embezzling money, loan sharking. And loan sharking is whenever you will, an organization will give out money, they will send out a loan to somebody. The individual doesn't want to go to a bank, but they're desperate, they need some money. And so that they will give them the money, but they will want the money back by a certain amount of time, and they will put very, very high interest rates on that. So it's another way that they make money as well. When we think about organized crime, historically, we may think about a time period, a short time period in American history where we had prohibition. This is a time period where alcohol was being prohibited from being sold. And it didn't last very long. It only lasted for about 13 years. The idea behind prohibition was actually really good. The idea behind it. Because during this time, there was serious issues of addiction, of alcohol addiction, especially among men. So this addiction had a lot of social problems. It affected their ability to get up in the morning and go to work, to take care of their family. It caused a lot of domestic violence issues against their wives and their children. And so the church would often rally during this time, and there was a lot of support from the church to get rid of alcohol. The idea was if we can get rid of alcohol, we can get rid of this poison out of society, then maybe our families can kind of come together. So it passed in 1920, but it started to cause a lot of issues and problems. And basically what it did, it opened up a massive black market. People still wanted their alcohol, and since you couldn't legally sell it anymore, this allowed the mob, the mafia, to get involved in the manufacturing of alcohol and actually selling it. So what happened is that it also increased not only organized crime, but it increased crime pretty much nationwide. We saw the rise of gangsters in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City. There was still a huge demand for alcohol, and so since it wasn't being sold, it created a black market. Another negative thing, besides not only increasing crime and devastation within the inner cities, we also lost a ton of tax revenue. So since alcohol was no longer being taxed anymore, being sold, then it wasn't being taxed. So during this time period, the United States lost about $11 billion in tax revenue. That's a lot of money now, but back then it was a whole lot of money. So after about 13 years of dealing with the loss of tax revenue, the increase of crime families and organizations, it was decided that the lesser of two evils is just to get rid of prohibition and start selling alcohol again.
I think that contributed to the Great Depression.
I don't know. Contributed to the Great Depression. I don't know. You talking about from like a financial, a market standpoint by not having the tax revenue, maybe?
Yeah, I think the Great Depression started what?
Around 1928 through the 30s. So it was during that time.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
It couldn't have helped the whole situation
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah, that's an interesting point I hadn't really thought of, since there was massive tax revenue loss. What effect did it have on the markets during that time? You would have to believe that it had some sort of effect as a variable of many variables playing into it.
And then it probably boosted the organized crime because everybody was in the Great Depression, wanting alcohol that much more.
That's right. Yeah.
It's kind of like a vicious cycle, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because whenever people are down on their luck and they're homeless, they're jobless, they're struggling, it does make sense that there would be a lot of people that would want to turn to alcohol just to feel a little bit better. Not that it's healthy, but just to kind of self-medicate. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So let's talk about the two main ways that criminology and sociology tracks crime. And it's really important that we do track crime because we need to see the trends and what direction that they're going. The first one is called the National Crime Victimization Survey. And this is a survey that is sent out to a sample of American households each year. And it's asking them questions. Have you been a victim of a crime? And also, if you have been a victim of a crime, what type of crime was it? Was it a violent crime? Was it a property crime? Can you be specific? The last thing it will ask is, did you report it? So the good thing about the National Crime Victimization Survey is that this gives us a little bit of insight, not only on what crimes that are being committed nationwide, where they are happening, what types, but it also gives us an idea if those crimes are actually being reported to the police or not. And that's something that's very different than the Uniform Crime Report, because all of these crimes are being reported. In the Uniform Crime Report, this is where we have local law enforcement, state law enforcement, where all reported crimes that they deal with within the agency are all sent to the FBI each year. So they have a massive report nationwide, city to city, county to county, state to state. And so it deals with and it shows what local and state law enforcement are dealing with on a daily basis. Very extensive, very, very thorough, and this is through the FBI. Sociologists use this report extensively in their research to track what is going on around the country in their research. A lot of good information there. So let's move on. We'll take a look at various theories to explain crime and deviance. If we have somewhat of an understanding of why crimes occur, then the idea is that maybe we can get ahead of it or deal with it better. So the first theory is called strain theory, and this is a micro level theory dealing with very small groups and also the individual. Strain theory states that sometimes people may act out in a deviant way or possibly cross the line to criminal activity due to strain and stressors in their lives. So I gave the example earlier about somebody who's struggling with a brain tumor or Alzheimer's disease. They may act out socially inappropriate because of those strains or those stressors. Sometimes people who are homeless or they are in extensive poverty, they may rob people. They may go to the grocery store and steal bread in order to survive. Not necessarily that they're bad people, but they're just in a really bad situation. Addiction is going to be a big part of this here. People who are struggling with drugs And alcohol, obviously, since they have sedated themselves or they are amped up on various types of drugs, they their inhibitions are lessened and they're just not thinking straight. They're more likely to do things that they would normally do. This can also explain the issue of prostitution and also stripping as well in order to make money. A lot of this has to do with there's problems happening in this person's life where they feel desperate to kind of go to that level. And sometimes people, they just need help. They need help getting out of poverty, getting off drugs and alcohol to kind of clean up their life, to kind of move away from deviant behavior and also criminal activity. Anami theory is also a strain theory, but this is more on a large scale, a macro scale. And this is where there's strain and stressors within society. There's chaos within society. This can happen with natural disasters, whether we're talking about tornadoes that come through Arkansas or tornadoes that come through Oklahoma that may completely devastate an area. People become very, very desperate to get food and water. Sometimes there may be civil unrest or civil wars that are happening around the world where there's just absolute chaos going on and people are just so desperate in order to survive and they're doing things that they wouldn't normally do to survive, whether it's violence towards others or stealing food or water in order to survive. Which a lot of this really kind of does make sense because if you put almost anybody in a situation where they're struggling to survive and they have kids to take care of, even the best people sometimes will go to the furthest extremes in order to survive. We've just been blessed enough in this country that for the most part, we have food, water, and shelter. These things are basically taken care of for most people. The third one is called conflict theory. So conflict theory is going to take a look at the dynamic of marginalized groups that may kind of push back against society. Whenever they push back, even in peaceful protest, they may be viewed as deviant groups because they're trying to change the status quo. Sometimes it will actually lead to other forms of crimes, riots, burning down businesses, stealing, crossing the line to assassinations. And like I mentioned earlier, most sociologists, it's okay to kind of buck the system if there's really social injustice, but you don't want to get to the point where actually involve criminal activity and actually hurting people. So that's conflict theory. They're going to be looking at it from a macro level, from a marginalized group type of perspective. The next theory is called cultural transmission theory, and this has to do with whenever individuals are trying to get into groups that are involved in either crime or deviant type of behavior or behavior that society would view as being kind of inappropriate. So if you have individuals that are trying to get involved in street gang activity, in order for this newcomer to be accepted within this particular game, they're going to have to take on the values and the beliefs and sometimes the criminal activity in order to be kind of welcomed into this. The young person may be kind of pulled into the street game because they want protection. They want to feel like they have a family. They may want notoriety. They may want to have money or connections. Another example of this would be among religious cults. Sometimes people are drawn to religious cults. They may be involved in things that mainstream society would view as being inappropriate, whether it's polygamy, the abuse of children, massive suicide. But in order to be part of this particular group, you're going to have to play ball and you're going to have to do what we want you to do. And if you're not with us, then you're against us and you need to go somewhere else. So this really kind of has to do with any type of group, whether it's a biker gang, street gang, mob, mafia, religious cults, that as a newcomer, you got to prove yourself. You want to be part of us, you got to prove yourself. And this is actually really common among street gangs and also biker gangs as well. Not a biker club, but a biker gang. There's a difference there. A biker club, they're usually not committing crimes. A biker gang typically is. And a lot of times they'll be wearing these jackets, and on the back of it, it'll say like pledge or prospect. So they're trying to kind of prove themselves to kind of be part of that group. White supremacist groups, any type of radicalized group would fall into this category. The next one is called social learning theory. And this has to do with how rewards and punishments can either reinforce deviant behavior or criminal activity, or it can extinguish it. So if you have the schoolyard bully who gets a lot of respect and people are scared of him, and he's getting a lot of emotional type of reward or financial reward for kind of bullying the kids, well, there's a good chance that each day he's going to keep manifesting into this kind of bullying. Same thing goes for criminal activity. If somebody steals a vehicle and within an hour they make some money after they've gotten rid of it, well, that's a very powerful reinforcement. It's not only a financial reinforcement, it's also a psychological, because they got that rush. So because there was a reward, there's a good chance that next time they get that phone call to make that easy money, they're going to kind of move into that. They're going to lean into it. But you also have to take a look at how punishments are involved. Sometimes the punishment is so severe if somebody is involved in criminal activity, if they steal something, and especially if they get caught, they go to juvie for a while, or they go to prison, or even just the mere fact that they get arrested. It may be so embarrassing that they may decide, you know what, I really need to get help. I got to get off alcohol. I need to clean myself up. So that's what this takes a look at, how rewards and basically punishments either reinforce or extinguish our decisions. The next one, differential association theory. It's similar to cultural transmission theory, but it's not the same. Cultural transmission theory is more dealing with certain types of radicalized groups shaping your behavior. Differential association theory has to do more with peer group influence and how it can either motivate you towards deviant behavior or actually kind of pull you away from it. So what differential association theory says that the groups that we spend a lot of time with and that we are emotionally connected to can either move us towards deviance or away from it. Megan, you mind shutting that door, please? Thank you. So again, this has to do with the people that we're hanging out with. And you could probably think about through different times in your life, there are certain groups or individuals that you spend time with, you spend a lot of time with, you're emotionally connected to, that they may have encouraged you to do the right thing, to go down the right path. And there may have been other times throughout your life that you were hanging around certain types of people that weren't the best influence, and they may have changed your perception of certain things, and they may have encouraged you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. So this can go both ways, either in a positive or a negative direction. The main thing about this is recognizing it. If you recognize that there are certain groups of people that are in your life that are not adding to your life but taking away, that sometimes you have to look at it for whatever it is. Even if you really like this person and you're connected to them, sometimes you may have to set some boundaries and make some adjustments if they're not moving you in the right direction. Lastly, we have labeling theory. Labeling theory has to do with the labels that we attach to ourselves, that we identify with, and how they kind of move us in certain directions. So if you remember, we talked about the self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy says whenever we believe a perception about ourselves, whether it's right or wrong, and we start acting out this perception, it can become a reality. That's pretty much the same thing with labeling theory. So where self-fulfilling prophecy, you're believing a perception, labeling theory, you're believing the label that's attached to yourself. So if a career criminal has a label on themselves that they value, such as gangster, whatever it may be, something that they hold value to, there's a good chance because they hold value to it that they're going to be kind of acting that out even whenever they get out of prison. That's why there's such a serious issue of recidivism whenever people get out of prison. they kind of go back to their old ways. And one of the reasons why is because they still kind of value the gang lifestyle. But sometimes what happens is that there are some people that they go through the process of being in the system, they're in and out of prison, but they're also getting older. They're getting out of their 20s, they may be moving in their 30s and 40s, and they're starting to realize that this is no longer suiting my life anymore. And so they may have a conscious effort that, you know what, this time when I get out of prison, I'm not doing this again. It holds no value to me anymore. And this is really important because at that moment, that label of them being attached to the gang or whatever the group is falls off at that point. And the moment that that falls off, their perception changes and their actions start to change. So that's usually the moment when the career criminal or the individual, they no longer value it, that they start to move away from it and start making better decisions. So I know we went through several different theories. Does anybody have any questions about any theories or any of the concepts that we talked about today?